Bashar al-Assad's army mounts an all-out attempt to retake Syria's second city, as the world's top diplomats try again to puzzle out a way to end the war. So how important is Aleppo in the battle for Syria? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine. Now, it was once Syria's commercial and economic hub. By the early 2000s, Aleppo had emerged as a city of high cuisine and culture. It was even named a World Heritage Site by the UN, and it was a centre point of trade and industry. But now, that once booming city is being bombed in earnest. Now, Aleppo is seen as a big prize in this war. The government is determined to take back full control. Government airstrikes have resumed on the eastern part of the city, which is held by rebels. And diplomats meeting in New York haven't been able to restore a ceasefire, which started last week but didn't last. So the fighting goes on, and more Syrians are dying, adding to the 400,000 people who've died already. Well, Aleppo is in northwestern Syria. The city has been divided between rebel and government forces for the past 4 years. People living in the rebel-held eastern parts of the city are completely besieged and have been for months. Government forces have stepped up their attack on Aleppo because of the city's strategic importance. It's about 50 kilometres from the Turkish border and is the main supply route for rebels in the north. The city also has symbolic importance. It was the largest city and the former economic capital of Syria. Well, President Asaad has said he's determined to regain complete control of Syria. The US Secretary of State has again emphasised the only way to solve the conflict is at the negotiating table, not on the battlefield.
We remain absolutely convinced there is no such thing as a military solution. There can only be a political solution in order to actually get extremists and all of the parties to end the violence. Without that political solution, one party or the other will continue to prosecute in its own way, whether it's just suicide belts or car bombs, but the violence will continue. And the capacity to put Syria back together will not present itself.
All right, let's bring in our guests. In London, we have James Denselow, a fellow at the Centre for Syrian Studies. From Damascus via Skype, we have Taleb Ibrahim. He's a Syrian political analyst. And in Gaziantep in Turkey, but right on the border with Syria, we have Asaad Achi. Now, he's the executive director of the civil society organisation Baytna, Syria. Welcome to you all. Can I start with you, Asaad, in Gaziantep, because you are geographically closest to Aleppo. It seems very much as though the battle for Aleppo is underway.
That's absolutely true. I mean, for the past 3 days, the Assad regime and his Russian allies have been using white phosphorus in bombing the eastern parts of Aleppo city. We've had that for 2 successive nights over the last 2 nights, and ever since this morning, there is a new ammunition coming into play. We don't really know what it is, whether it's surface-to-surface missiles or air-to-surface missiles, but it's creating huge damage. Upon impact, it's creating a crater that is about 2 meters deep and about 3 meters wide. This is unprecedented level of destruction that we haven't seen in the past 5 years of war in Aleppo or elsewhere in Syria. The Syrian regime army officially declared the battle for Aleppo last night, and it definitely seems that it's on its way.
And Taleb, in Damascus, from where you're sitting, just outside Damascus itself, but from where you're sitting, why does this battle for Aleppo seem to be so critical in the ongoing war in Syria?
Yes, I think the battle for Aleppo is very important because it is very important for the city itself. As you know, Aleppo is the economic capital of Syria. It is the second populated city in Syria. If we look from a military point of view, the majority of numbers of militant groups which are fighting the Syrian state are there in Aleppo. And Aleppo is very close to the Turkish borders. Aleppo is close to Al-Raqqa province where we have ISIS. We have to fight ISIS at the same time in which we are fighting Al-Nusra Front and other groups in Aleppo. For all of those reasons, the battle for Aleppo should be decisive, should be very important to determine the future of all the war in Syria.
And James, coming to you, is that how you see it? Do you see the battle for Aleppo being a definitive moment then in this war, which is dragging on to its 6th year?
Yes, I think the battle for Aleppo is a critical moment. Well, the notion of the fall of Aleppo to the regime would be a critical moment, but we're a long way from that point at this stage. And let's not forget that 11 days ago, we supposedly had the latest ceasefire, cautious optimism around it, and now we seem to be having some of the heaviest bombardment in eastern Aleppo's history over the last 5 years. So things can change very quickly in this conflict. I think that's the one thing you know for Syria. And I think the next big question really will be whether the tactics of the regime are to simply hit Aleppo with various airstrikes and shelling and wait for people to surrender, or whether they will actually go in on the ground with ground forces.
And Asaad in Gaziantep, you were talking earlier about the use of new types of ammunition. What is actually the situation in Aleppo with regard to the civilians? I understand that the regime has requested that civilians leave and hand themselves over to government checkpoints.
Well, as of this morning, we have confirmed 15 deaths already. So this is kind of the civilian situation today. In terms of the humanitarian corridors, that proposal came about 2 months ago when the first siege on Aleppo was imposed. And the Russians back then proposed 4 humanitarian corridors, 3 for civilians and 1 for armed groups to leave the city. But this is completely unacceptable. We cannot continue this practice of ethnically cleansing rebel-held cities. We've had that scenario in Daraya 2 weeks ago. We've had that scenario again yesterday in Al-Wa'ar in Homs, and we can't permit this practice of demographic transfer to continue endlessly and with impunity.
Okay, what do you mean by ethnic cleansing?
What I mean is the whole population of Daraya was made to leave Daraya city. There were about 8,000 people left in Daraya, and they were all moved out of their city, and the city now is completely empty. This is what I mean by ethnically cleansing cities.
But you've introduced, yes, but you've introduced the ethnic element. Are you suggesting this is an action against one specific ethnic or sectarian group?
No, what I'm suggesting, this is an action against anybody who dreamt one day of opposing this regime. It's not necessarily ethnic or religious or sectarian, but it's mainly targeting all forms of disobedience to the current regime in place in Damascus. So anyone who ever raised his voice basically against Bashar al-Assad and the crimes that he has been committing for the past 5 years, basically what the whole world is telling us is our fate is to be displaced from our own cities into elsewhere.
All right. Taleb, in undertaking this serious escalation in its operation against Aleppo at a time when there is significant diplomacy, we are told, going on in New York, is the Syrian government undermining any possibility of a return to a truce, a cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire, whatever you want to call it?
No, absolutely not. Syrian government is very much interested in reaching a permanent ceasefire or a permanent stop. To stop all the war in Syria, war is a very much ugly thing, the only beautiful thing in the war is it is end. We want to see this war comes to its end. I think Syrian government is very much concerned about ending the war, about making a real reconciliation, not ethnic cleansing or evacuation of citizens, like what is being imagined in some media. I don't agree that absolutely, because it is not true. All the inhabitants of Al-War are, which is a part of Homs, are inside Homs, who wants to leave this. Some families of militants, they want to live with those militants. Some of those militants choosing to stay at the city and to make a reconciliation with the Syrian army. They are approved as a part of the society. There isn't any cleansing, nor for sectarian reasons, nor for ethnic reasons, and nor for political reasons. I don't agree that. Absolutely, I deeply believe that Syrian government is very much concerned about reaching a real peace, reconciliation, stability, and rebuilding Syria. This is the most important thing for us here in Damascus.
James, as we've already referred to, John Kerry, Sergei Lavrov, and so many others are currently deep in negotiation as to trying to find a way as to reinstate some kind of truce in these hostilities. Do you believe that undertaking this operation and launching this onslaught onto the eastern parts of Aleppo is undermining the work being done in New York?
Of course, and events on the ground in Syria have undermined attempts at diplomacy, whether in New York, Geneva or Vienna. And there's been a massive disconnect, I think, between the various plans that UN special envoys have had or peace conferences have proposed to what is happening on a day-to-day reality. And I think if I was a resident of Eastern Aleppo, I would have a deep skepticism and cynicism around whether the international community will ever do anything more than sort of put its hands in the air and say, we're trying to do stuff, but it's not actually materializing. I think the diplomacy is pretty desperate. There's a huge lack of trust now between Moscow and Washington, and we saw that at the UN yesterday where John Kerry and Secretary Lavrov were pretty much in sort of open disagreement. I think the worst I've seen it for some time there, and I'm not sure entirely how they stitch that back up in time. They'll presumably want to have some form of face-saving measure as to what happened with the ceasefire, because at the moment they're just blaming each other while the regime blames militant groups, as they call them, for breaking the ceasefire, and so everyone blames everyone else.
All right.
The only people who seem to suffer, of course, are civilians.
All right. At this point, let's have a listen now to the leader of Jabhat Fatah alSham. Of course, that's the group that was previously known as Nusra Front, and it criticised that US-Russia ceasefire plan. Abu Mohammed al-Jalali is his name, and he says that the agreement's only purpose was to force Sunni fighters to surrender. Let's listen.
The issue of the Levant is clear now. The US-Russian agreement is nothing but a military and security agreement that will lead politically to nothing but surrender. The agreement aims at forcing the military factions to surrender, and this is the so-called political solution. Also, the negotiations called for by de Mistura will lead to nothing but surrender. The Sunnis feel very much lost. We're not defending villages and cities, we're defending our existence. This is the case of the Sunnis across Levant. If this Shia project succeeds in the Levant, God forbid, it will hit Sunnis in the whole region. What we see now in the Levant may happen in the eastern part of the Arabian Peninsula within 10 years. We've already seen things in Yemen that we were not expecting at all. What we didn't want to see in Iraq took place according to the plans of the Shias and the Americans, as the US has handed Iraq to the Shias. This is again what the Americans are trying to do in the Levant.
All right, what we heard there was somebody describing this fight in Syria as one of an existential nature. I'm just wondering, starting with you, Asaad, whether you believe that the war in Syria has gone too far, too much blood has been shed for there to be a political settlement.
Well, definitely too much blood has been shed, and we never wanted blood to be shed to start with. We started a peaceful uprising against a dictator back in 2011. Let's not forget that what we're seeing and what we're calling today war was a peaceful uprising against one of the most ruthless dictators that history has ever seen.
But can a political settlement, still be achieved?
In World War II.
Yes, but can a peaceful settlement, a political settlement, be achieved now?
Yes, it can. And yes, it can. I mean, definitely it can be achieved if there is a political will in the international community to reach a political settlement. This conflict has internationalized. It's not in the hands of the Syrians anymore. But if there is a political will in the hands of between Russia and the United States, if they really care about protecting civilians and ending this war, they can, definitely. But you need a political will. You need an active Security Council, not endless Security Council resolutions that are not implemented, starting with 2118 and ending with 2268. None of these 41 Security Council resolutions has been issued to deal with the Syria case. None of them have been implemented.
All right, okay. Taleb, can I ask the same question to you? Do you believe that this conflict, which started as a conflict between President Assad's government and sections of Syrian society, has now become too internationalized? Do you believe that the outside interests are taking much more, are having much more influence over the actual war, and that the will of Syrian people, the Syrian people themselves, is less audible, is less easily heard now?
Unfortunately, from the beginning, it wasn't a struggle between President Assad's regime and the Syrian society as being imagined. This is misunderstanding about what had happened in Syria. I think what had happened from the beginning, it was a regional war and international war inside Syria by local tools, different local tools. Now the war reached its real phase, which is an international struggle for a lot of reasons, for geostrategic issue like energy resources and pipelines, like who will control this area, like the new raising powers, regional raising powers like Turkey and Iran and others. Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, what I want to highlight it here, that Saudi Arabia wants to fight Iran. It will fight Iran inside Syria. Israel wants to undermine the power of Hezbollah and the capabilities of Hezbollah, how they must defeat and topple Assad, etc., etc. So this conflict is very, very much complicated. It is not an internal conflict. Yes, it is inside Syria, but I think that it is now a very complicated war, and it is war on the Syrian state. Hundreds of thousands of our soldiers and our civilians from all classes lost their lives, but I don't think they lost their lives because of an internal issue, an internal matter in Syria. Again, I can repeat, it's a regional war, international war inside Syria.
And James, I'll put that point to you then. I mean, do you agree? Do you think that this has now become a battle of the proxies?
I think there's three conflicts going on simultaneously in Syria, and within those you have different battlefields and different alliances. I think there's a local, a regional and an international dimension to this fight, and one day it will end, and one day we'll see a new form of political order emerge in Syria. Remember, the Lebanese civil war lasted for 15 years. I think the one thing to say is that nobody will win this war. Syria has suffered far too much for anyone to be seen as a winner. I think it's all about who emerges relatively intact or in whatever balance of power follows. And I think this is a moment not only simply because of what's happening in Aleppo, but also the fact that we do have a presidential election in the US coming up in November. And I think it's very likely that the new president in Washington, whoever that is, will have a more assertive approach to Syria than the predecessor.
And Assad, this conflict has surely reinforced, if not exploited, the pre-existing fault lines that were in Syrian society. Are these risks too big to overcome? Can various communities ever live together again?
Well, various communities in Syria have lived together for the past 2,000 or 3,000 years. I see no reason why they cannot live together again. I understand that the regime has employed the sectarian rift between the different sectarian compositions of Syria and the ethnic rift between the different ethnicities and different national interests within Syria. but things can be repaired. Definitely the future of Syria is a decentralized model. I'm not here to determine what kind of decentralization we'll look at, but definitely we can't have a unitarian state again. But in a decentralized format, yes, Syrians can live together again and will coexist and even cooperate together for a better future.
And Taleb, so many accusations have been levelled at the actions of the Syrian government, accusations of breaking international humanitarian law, of actually committing war crimes. How much is the issue of accountability, how much apprehension, if there is any, among government supporters, primarily in the Damascus area where you are?
I don't think that all what is being said in media is true. I witnessed myself personally. I am living in Syria and in Damascus from the beginning of this damned war against Syria, against Syrian population, against Syria, the state. I think I witnessed a lot of lies. I saw a lot of false reports in media about what's happening in Syria and so on. So I don't think this should be very, very much effective to make any change in the battle for Syria. But I am sure that what is very important for all of Syrians is how to reach a reconciliation, how to stop that war, how to reset with each other's as Syrians without any external intervention in our own issues.
And all the while, James, the top diplomats in the whole world are gathered in New York, and yet it seems to be eluding them, finding a formula that can make the guns silent, that can take the warplanes out of the sky. Why are they not able to concoct some sort of formula that will at least give Syrians some breathing space, at least allow them in some humanitarian aid? They don't seem to be able to do it.
Well, it's a critical question, and I think ultimately why Syria is so important is that it goes far beyond the country itself. It's international norms and our principles that are being eroded, as well as the lives of Syrians that are being lost. And when you have all these resolutions that are ignored and all these diplomacy and all these conferences that simply come up with statements that are not adhered to, then, as I say, the system by which this planet governs itself and relations between states is seriously fraying. And I think that will be a legacy of the Syrian conflict that goes beyond its borders, whether it is the types of weapons used, the numbers of civilians used, what is targeted, etc. These are all aspects of a conflict that go far beyond Syria's borders, and I think that's one of the most tragic legacies of this conflict.
And Asaad, as we learn from the Syrian military that this stepping up of its air attacks on the eastern parts of the city are just a precursor for a ground operation. What is the feeling, what is the sense among the people of Aleppo in general, but the eastern parts in particular?
Well, they're going to resist. They don't want to leave their land. They want to stay. They had the option to leave when the siege was broken for about a month. We have about 300,000 civilians that live in this city, and they refused to leave. They had a month gap, and they remain in the city. They remain in the city because it's their land, it's their home, and they don't want to leave. And they will resist, no matter how many forces the Syrian regime is going to employ, and no matter how many allies it's going to bring in from external countries. The people will resist. It's their home. They want to stay, and they will face it.
Asaad Achi, Taleb Ibrahim and James Denselow, thank you all very much indeed. And as ever, thank you for watching. You can see the programme again anytime you like by going to the website, aljazeera.com. If you want to join the discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That is facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. But for now, from me, Martine Dennis, and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.